wonderful day. If it is the day still for you, if not, I hope it was a good day. I'm going to be doing some extra white bubble mint as basically always. I'm going to do a quick ramble video today. So I've got myself a topic of conversation, kind of like a laid back video. But I thought I would do a little video talking about some D&D stuff today. So I've got a few notes that I've got here that I am going to be reading from. So the topic of conversation is for today, what makes a good first D&D session? What is good for the very first session for a party that's just meeting? Like maybe, I guess this is applicable for whether or not it's your first time doing D&D or not. But what generally instigates a good session, but also good for beginning players as well, or beginning players, GMs, whatever. So the very first thing is knowing what the tone is going to be, right? Even the adventure is not as important as knowing the tone, because if you know the tone, you can make adventures based off of that. If you know it's going to be high fantasy, if you know it's going to be horror, it doesn't matter what the story is, because you know what you're designing, what you're going into. So first and foremost, you should have already had this conversation as part of session 0, so players know if they haven't actively signed up for a listing already. Knowing what the campaign is going to be. But if you're saying to friends, hey, let's play some D&D, especially if you're writing it and they don't know what the module will be, it's good to know the tone. So what makes a good first session is knowing the tone and then leaning into that. So are you playing in a horror game? Is it more light-hearted? Is it comedy? Are you going more like a serious role play? Is it a wartime sort of adventure? Do you want it to be about politics, or do you want it to be kind of like a mystery, or is it a dungeon crawl? Right, that tone is important, and being able to set that right from the beginning is what makes a game session successful. With that in mind, once you know your tone, you know generally how the rest of the session is going to play out. Because if you played in any games, video games, watched movies or TV, you probably know the tropes of that genre, right? If you've ever watched something with dungeon crawling in it, like Dungeon Measure, you kind of know what the vibe is. That's an anime, by the way, guys, if you didn't know. If you have ever watched a horror movie, you kind of know generally what the tone, the stories that exist in horror movies, how they work, and you can build everything else around that. For me, that's the most important thing. Things that kind of stem out of that are the adventures, the plots, the characters, the NPCs that you would create. And bear in mind, guys, that I'm talking not just about... My phone was going off there. I'm not talking just about modules, I'm talking about homebrew adventures as well, they're interchangeable. So, things like music as well, horror films generally have a really specific type of music, right? You kind of know when you're listening to a horror soundtrack versus an epic action adventure, and with that you know what kind of Spotify playlist to make if you're doing music that way, which you can. So I used to run games when I first started with my friends. I would have Spotify playlists for different sort of tones and genres. Out of that, let's say you are making your own adventure. Once you know the tone, you can sit down and go, okay, what are the stories that come from that, and lean into that. Now I'm not going to go in, this video is not about how to design adventures, so I'm not really touching on that now, but the point is, a successful first session, a good first session, is a DM that has thought about that tone and gone, what are the stories that really benefit that story? A dungeon crawl within horror might not fit as well if you want to make it a horror game. Dungeon crawls, you have to do extra work there, right? Because you're crossing a bit of a genre, so to speak. I guess kind of. It depends, but anyway, my point being, like, you know, you're still like merging things in D&D. So once you've got all of that and you start to form that, it's about the actual session beginning. So let's say you've done all that preparation, you've got the module set up, you've written the adventure. What else actually makes it successful? What is a good D&D session going to consist of? That's a very first session. Well, it's going to include a good introduction to the world. So, especially if your players have never played D&D before, or if they're playing in a brand new world they've never seen before, or if you want to highlight a very specific thing about this world, even if they have played it before. Sorry there, not the microphone. Then you are going to want to do some work at establishing the world. So are you starting your adventure in a horror town, like a haunted town, where you're going to want to really set the tone with that? Think about the visuals, the sort of senses. I always have like a list of things that I like to touch on in terms of like the senses. When it comes to places, there are the 5, you know, the sound, smell, taste, touch and sight, but also there are other ones. There is instinctual atmosphere, so things like the 6th sense, if you were, humidity, weather, and like other sensations that might fall outside of that realm. A lot of them being more like psychological, so like you could take 3 of those and pinpoint them, right? So if you're in a ghost town, you might say that it is exceptionally chilly here. You've talked about the temperature. You might say that it is exceptionally foggy and hard to see around you except for the silhouettes of buildings. That's sight. And then sound, you might add in there saying there's a caw in the distance as a crow flies overhead. You've already set kind of a spooky tone. Whereas if I go into a war, let's say we're kicking the adventure off in the middle of a grand battle, I might start it off by saying all of your characters smell blood and lots of it, followed up by all you can feel between your fingers is mud and a sticky tacky red substance. I've done touch, and finally I might say there is a sinking feeling in your stomach that at any moment you could be the next to die, that you are just an ant in an army of people being thrown at each other, and then I might go from there to describe the visual of the scene of the army there. So like within that, they're very specific examples, but introducing the world using those senses is really a good way to engage the players in, by saying that you are feeling this, as opposed to saying here is the world, this is what's happening, but like speak from their perspective. So a good first session will allow the players to be engaged, and that's a good way of doing it with the game world. Make note of any specific examples. Like sometimes I will, like what I tend to do is start from a bird's eye view and then swoop into the scene with the characters. So setting knowledge about the world is a good example, and presumably you've given them some details in a session 0 to make characters, but what you might have done is leave out like the actual description. So you might talk about the game world. Now, depending on what type of adventure this is, give them only information that pertains to that. If you're expecting the players to do a big, like, sandbox world adventure, where they could literally go anywhere and do anything, and that's the design, and the story gets made from that point, then you're going to want to give like a broad description of the lands, like some of the main kingdoms, some of the main players in the game. Maybe describe some of the various points of topography, as if you were a bird circling high in the sky of this planet, before like beginning to hone in on information and giving them some local details. Whereas if you are running a game that is very centric in one area, you might want to fill them with more like plot hooks or interesting bits of information. For example, if I'm running an Icewind Dale game, I might talk about how Icewind Dale has its cluster of individual townsteads that are all at odds with each other, competing for survival. I might depict the way in which the rime has affected them. I then might make note of the Goliaths that live in the mountains, the tribes that patrol over the tundra, and of course like some of the monsters that exist within there. And what I'm doing there is giving them like a non-diegetic description of the world, settling them into it with the mindset for the players, the characters maybe not so much, but the players. And so that lets them in the know of like some of the things they can engage with. A successful first session implies to your characters, implies to your players what the game is going to be about, what the tone of the game will be, and giving them a good like off point, jumping point to go from, especially if they are doing a sandbox or a homebrew game but they don't know what the story is going to be. Taking a step from that further onwards would be to say the next thing you need to do to make a good first session, I would say anyway, and it feels like it should be self-explanatory, is have something planned for them. Now, unless you sat down with players and said, hey guys, what do you want the first adventure to be in your game? Unless you've explicitly said that, they're not going to know what they need to do at the beginning. Let's say, well, my headphones just turned off. Sorry guys, one moment. You are listening to some campfire sounds and they've unfortunately just turned off. Let me see if I can do this. I believe they're working now. Okay, I think it's working. Yep. Alright. So, they're not going to know what they're doing. Let's say that you start the adventure in a tavern, right? Classic adventure start. They need to know what they're going to do, right? They're going to meet in a tavern. They might, they just meet there. How do you get those characters to interact? Well, unless you've explicitly said they start together, they already know each other, then you're going to need a reason. And so the third thing I would say that you need to have a good successful first session is purpose, a reason for the first session to happen. There's a reason this is the first point in the story, is because it's the point they meet, it's the point where the adventure begins, it's the point where we as players step into the role of the characters, and this is where a tale starts. But you need a tale to start in order for a tale to start. So you as the GM need to make sure you have something planned, right? You need to know that you're not going into this with the assumption they're going to roleplay for an hour and then guess what they're going to do. Like, even just putting a job board in front of them doesn't really help that much. It can help, and like some veteran players will definitely be more inclined to be good at it. But I would recommend not putting like a job board up in a tavern right off the bat. Maybe in the future, or maybe off the bat, but like not assuming they're gonna do the work from it. So you might put a job board up, so that they have plot hooks going away from this first session or first like little adventure. But what I always do if I'm doing a homebrew game is give like a reason that the players are forced, or the characters are forced to work together. So I would say if a successful first session requires something that nudges them to work together, that might be that they've all come here to meet on a job. That's what I did with the Dungeon and the Mad Mage game. The players didn't know each other before, and some of them did. Most of them did not. The adventure began with them being called to take on a job, and then they would all work together on this job. I've had in the past players that were all kidnapped and were prisoners, and they had to escape together and then survive together in the wilds, and that's what made them become a party. I've had a group where they all happened to be in a town, and then some fish folk attacked the town, and the constabulary were like, no one can leave this town until we figured out what's happened. Very similar, I suppose, to the second campaign of Critical Role. You need like something that glues them together, a reason for them to stay together, because if you put a job board there and one of the characters is like, I guess I don't really want to do any of these, like, ultimately they've got to metagame a little bit. The purpose of that character existing is that they want to adventure, but still, you might find that it's not as easy. It might work in the long run, but you're going to find it's like you're not starting off to a great foot if the characters or the players like, yeah, but I know they need to adventure together, but like my character there's no way they would want to do that. Like they don't want to go back to the city because they've literally just escaped from there. Why did you give us a plot hook to go to the city, but all half the party want to go there? Like, I've got no reason to be invested with these other players that want to take on this job, and so it feels like it's not off to a good start. Giving them something where they can't get out of it helps. So they've all been given a job, or they a group of bandits attack the town, and they've got to work together to defeat them. But they've kidnapped one of the citizens. Now they've got to track them down and rescue them. When they're brought back to town, they're paid a sum of gold and told, "Hey, you guys work really well together. Hey, we've got another job actually." This merchant comes along and says, "Hey guys, like, I've been told like." There's an excavation. I delivered some supplies to an excavation team 2 days down the road, and they're looking for people to clear out this dungeon so they can go and like excavate the ruins. Boom, you've got an adventure. And so now they want to work together. So for a good first session, we'll get those players involved. Another good first session will give breathing room. So what I like to do is like, I really get a feel of the players beforehand, but I will have like an instigating moment that brings them together, or I will find a way for roleplay reasons to bring them together. So let's say, for example, by which, when I say give them space, what I mean is give them space to represent their characters. So you need them to roleplay, you need them to have like chances to interact. Throwing them into the mix and then just leaving them there isn't as beneficial. This all depends on the time that you have to spend running your first session. So maybe the first session should really be the first adventure, but the good first session, if you know you've got a limited amount of time, put in a short encounter and give the rest of the time for the players to sort of like interact afterwards. Maybe give like yourself half an hour of the game to describe like the introduction of the world, giving the players time to like hone in on each of their moments in the tavern. What are they doing here in the tavern? They've all come here. Are they drinking? Are they eating? Are they playing card games? They don't have to be together at this point. It's about establishing the characters in the game world. Then there's an instigating moment wherein something happens. The bandits break into the tavern and start demanding everyone put their gold into a coin purse as they go around. Each of these characters might react in a certain way. If none of them like initiate a fight, one of the townsfolk refuses to put money in, so they draw blades on him. And then something might happen there. Someone might notice that the players are armed and then nudge the other bandits and tell them to drop their weapons, and if they don't, they get rough with them. A fight ensues, the player characters all get involved. After that point, once the bandits have been defeated, you can go back to roleplay the stuff going on in the town. Let the players then have a moment to sort of interact with each other and talk about what just happened. Maybe they will work together now, maybe they won't, but the fact that the bandits attacked them gives them a reason to dislike them. So giving motivation as part of that is required as well. And that motivation can be vengeance, like that example. It could be the promise of gold. The town master might say, hey, if you guys go and follow up on these bandits, I will literally pay you 50 gold. It could be the promise of information that one of the players is looking for their own character. I would recommend maybe leaving that till later, or it could be like a side thing that's going on. Any number of things might happen there. Because despite the meta knowledge that the player's there to play the game, as a GM, time, you do have to give them the ability to have motivations. If you don't satisfy those motivations, it's very hard for a player to be justifying their character to be there, and that makes for awkward gameplay and awkward roleplay. When the player knows they have to stay, but now they're navigating it like, well, I'm not getting a monetary reward for this. My character is like true neutral, he does not care. But the rest of the party are adamant about it. Maybe there's something else. Maybe he can get a weapon, or maybe he can get something else. And as a GM, you've got to look at that and go, okay, maybe the Town Master says, hey, look, we need all that so we can get here. Can you, like, if you find whatever they've taken, just keep it. We want the people back. That's all we care about. Maybe that's how you can give them motivation. So, good first session gives them the characters space to be able to roleplay, space to represent their characters, to show their characters to each other, to build an ensemble with each other. My next note here I actually talked about already, which is kicking off the action, which is giving a strong beginning to the adventure, something that sets the tone. So in that ghost town example, maybe they go to a tavern and one of the people becomes possessed or something like that, you know, like you put all these pieces together and you get this great first session. If you really wanted to, I would also suggest like looking at your characters' backstories and figuring ways of bringing those in to the beginning. Maybe they've come here for a reason, right? That's a great way to tie a character in. Maybe one of them's looking for a lost family member and the last they heard they'd passed through this town, or something like that. Don't give them like the solid answers. Like what I always do is I ask my players to come up with a short and a long-term goal. Maybe their short-term goal has a clue here that's brought them to this place, and that in itself can become a plot hook for them to go forward. Pacing can always be hard with the first session, especially if you're new to GMing, so a good first session pacing, I would say, includes a little bit of combat, a good amount of roleplay to introduce the characters, some lore building, as in like giving the lore, it's more like a lore dump I suppose, but also giving those motivations, giving a sense of what the game will be like, even if they don't know the grand adventure, if you've got one planned or not. It's about them knowing, hey, this is the tone of the game, we are together now, we are a D&D party. At the end of the first session, well, a good D&D first session will end with the party feeling like they are now a party, even if it's only been one combat. So if your game sessions are 2 hours long versus 6 hours long, your first session is going to be very different. The first session for a 2-hour game might be introductions and a fight. That might not be all that it is. If possible, I always suggest having those first sessions be a little bit longer, if you can make it, purely for the fact that you want to invest them in the world. Anything longer usually gives them more chance, but also you don't want this first session to be too long, because you don't want to set the precedent for your characters or for your players that the game is going to be exhausting. So finding that pace is important, but that in of itself is something you learn as you play. So these are some of the things I would say make a good first session. I don't think the fight needs to necessarily be memorable. I think it's memorable because it's the first fight, so it doesn't have to be like extravagant. Don't go overboard, but at the same time it's very table dependent. The advice I've given here works for me, works for the tables that I run, doesn't work for everyone. Some people don't give a shit about their characters, they just want to run a dungeon crawl, and that's okay. That might be it. Maybe their introductions is, hey, I'm X name, hey, I'm X name, let's go and kill some things in this dungeon. That might be all that you need, and that's perfectly fine if that's your gameplay design. So think about what I've said here and consider what is important to you and to your players. This is just a general rule of thumb, I would say, of what generally makes a good first session, but again, it's very subjective. I just find it very important to give those characters motivation to game world, to let them know what the game world's like, and to give them something to do, to not just expect them to do something. The worst thing you can do is start a campaign and make the players feel like they don't know what's going on, because that will forever be in their mind. That sounds like a real bad thing to say, in as much as like putting people off from GMing, but honestly, literally anything could happen and it's fine. It's more a case of like, oh, I put this job board up here and expect the players to choose the single job that is on there, or like put a bunch of jobs on there and expect them to choose between them. They're never going to do that. I mean, they might do that, but it's going to be an awkward conversation. It's going to be difficult. You're going to feel like, oh shit. That's something you do after the first adventure, where they've started to know each other, even if that first adventure is literally facing down some enemies, choosing to work together to go and defeat them, and then coming back. That's generally what I would say is a good initial situation. Now, the context of that might change, right? I made an example of being in a prison, so in that case they don't really have much of a choice but to work together, and I think that usually is what benefits a D&D party, forcing them to work together rather than giving them the option. If you force them to work together, we'll start the adventure with them already working together. Generally you're going to have a more smoother introduction, because you're going to get you're already over the awkward bit of like, oh, should we like work together on this or something. If they're thrown into a situation like a prison, there's a reason why it works so well as a trope. It's because it works. That's what I would recommend. Forcing them into an adventure. But again, that doesn't actually have to be that well fleshed out. You can make a simple adventure with like 3 bullet points. The bullet points here are: players start at the tavern, bandits attack the tavern, bandits kidnap one of the locals, the party have to go and rescue them from a camp. And you can literally make all of that up as you go along. You could have like the monster manual there picking monsters out. You could lean into things that they suggest, like maybe they say like, oh, what if they're keeping wolves there? And then you're thinking like, I'm gonna add some wolves to that encounter now. And when they get there, they're like, oh my god, look, there's wolves, we were right. And filling that first session with really positive moments for the players is what I would recommend. Another successful first session point. This is a personal preference, probably, but I would imagine it's a fairly universal experience. The best first session means that the players don't die in it. You don't kill off a player character in the first session, especially if they're a new player. This sucks. Look, first level characters, if you're starting at first level, they are squishy. A cough could kill them. That said, do your best. Pardon me, I apologise. Do your best to protect the players from that sort of risk, because for veteran players they may not care so much, but players who get really invested in their character, to see them die in the first session when they've like put effort into it, it kind of sucks. But it's even worse for the players that have just started playing D&D, because they are then forever gonna like remember that moment, like their first contact point with D&D is their character died. And whilst that can be funny for some parties, there does tend to be like a oh okay sort of feeling, and then they've got to make a character in the middle of the session, and so I would recommend being cautious with how much of a threat you make in the first session, because I have often killed players in my early GMing days in first sessions. There used to be a joke that I had, which was no player character, or at least one person's player character, won't survive their first session with me. And it was because I would overly complicate first sessions. Now granted, I'm exaggerating a little bit, most of those deaths came in like one shots and not like really important things, but I've killed a few characters over my time in session 1, so yeah, that's my personal recommendation to you. But otherwise I think that is kind of it. I would say the last thing is making sure that that first session is memorable. It doesn't have to be a grand adventure, but giving those players the time to make it memorable. Maybe let them do a few more cool things, even if you're not like a rule of cool guy. Let them do a few things, let them experience it being as a memorable first session, unless you are very adamant about setting the precedent that they can't do that. I think it will be memorable anyway. I remember my first sessions very, very well, and I would like to think my players remember their first sessions. My player characters in Descent into Avernus, in their very first session, witnessed the destruction of Elturel, and to give like an example of what I've just previously described, in that game session, I'm just noticing something in the sky. What is that? It's very bright. Could be the International Space Station. Up there, look. Oh, can I actually pointed it? There it is. I think that. Oh my gosh. I'm not angling right. There we go. I think it's the International Space Station is moving as slowly and quickly as it. It's definitely not a plane. Oh no. Well, it's a plane. I can see the flickering now. The coloured lights, and it's a plane. Whoops. Anyway. Gosh, I forgot what I was talking about. Oh yes. My Descent into Avernus game. So in my Descent into Avernus game, I had player characters starting with the destruction of Elturel, but I began initially like honing on individual moments. Now these player characters were spread across the city, so it wasn't even like they're in the same tavern or they're in the same prison cells or whatever, or in different prison cells. They were in totally different parts of this city, and then Elturel started getting destroyed and they had to escape it, and they eventually found themselves fleeing the city. That was the introduction to the game world. It was the introduction to set the tone for the campaign. They didn't work together in that beginning bit though. I incorporated a couple of different examples that I used just then, to then make this work. So after this what I called the prologue, afterwards we started with the assumption now that they'd found a means of getting to Baldur's Gate, which was individually they'd ended up as part of a convoy heading towards the city of Baldur's Gate, and they were journeying together. So I used an addition of like starting with them individually, starting before the fact of them I guess existing as a party, but then I also did like a fade to black transition to the beginning, so it was kind of like a prologue wherein they already were travelling together, albeit they didn't really know each other. And the thing is, it worked because whilst they were travelling together, they didn't know each other, barely had spoken, because they literally just watched thousands and thousands of people die, presumably. And that was the beginning of that session. Other ones, for example, I've done before. Icewind Dale. I have player characters describing like their first moments in a crowded, very very claustrophobic tavern in the north, as a sort of prologue to their adventure, the beginning of their journey, I should say, through the mountains to Icewind Dale, so it gives a chance for them to introduce each other. They're all here for the same reason, which is they're going to be getting onto a convoy of sleds and head to Icewind Dale, so they already have a goal in mind. They're going to meet, and suddenly they're meeting each other at the sleds, sort of like discovering each other. And so whilst their introduction to each other is that they already know they've got a mission, which is, or they've got a goal to journey together towards Icewind Dale, and they're just kind of like getting to know the people they're moving with. And even if they decide not to roleplay, it doesn't matter, because they are going to be journeying together. That's the part of the thing that those characters are there for. And then later on they come upon an encounter where they actually have to work together as a team, and that's what kind of solidifies them as a party. But otherwise it's more of like a montage of moments over the course of the days, and it goes back to an introduction. So there's a few examples from Dragonized. The campaign module itself actually describes the beginning as being the players have come to Trollskull. No, sorry, not to Trollskull. Have come to the Yawning Portal to get some drinks or get food or whatever they're there for individually, and end up in a fight with some sturges and a troll. And so they work together to defeat the sturges, and once they defeat the monsters, Volo comes up to them and says, "Hey, you guys worked really good together. Can I hire you for a job?" And they can, presumably at that point, they are going to be wanting to work together because that's part of the adventure. And you can have Volo offer them a bunch of stuff, and he's going to like offer them loads of money, which he can't pay. But there you go. So there's a few examples from some of the modules, some of the ways that I've warped modules, and some of the ways that I've done homebrew to introduce characters. I don't know if this video was very helpful. I don't know if you guys are actually going to watch it with the intent of listening to it for the purpose of getting some tips on making a good first session. You might just be listening to this for the relaxing sounds and whispers and gum chewing, and might have no interest in D&D at all. It's just me rambling on a topic you don't care about purely for the good sounds, and that's perfectly fine, and I don't blame you. You know, I'm happy to do that with other people's videos as well when I'm going to sleep anyway. So that's fair enough. But if you have watched this video and that's been useful to you, let me know kind of the ways that you start some D&D games if you've run them before, or if you think the advice was useful. In either case, make sure to drop a comment below and let me know what you thought of the video. Make sure to thumbs up if you enjoyed. Consider subscribing and pressing the bell icon if you want updates on when I upload. And check out the videos appearing on the side of the screen over there. I'm sure you will like them. YouTube recommends them, so it must be good, because YouTube is never wrong, is it? Otherwise, I hope you have a good one. Take care, guys. Bye bye.